In a time of rising unrest, when borders dominate headlines and immigration policy shapes the future of our nation, the truth matters. From the front lines of law enforcement, national security, and public policy, this is Frontline Facts, where rhetoric is stripped away, where politics takes a back seat, and where facts, hard, documented facts, lead the conversation. As instability grows beyond our southern border, as communities feel the impact at home, we bring you informed voices. Attorneys, senior law enforcement leaders, policy experts, and professionals who understand the law, the protocols, and the consequences. This isn't opinion. This isn't spin. This is clarity in a time of confusion. This is Frontline Facts, and the conversation starts now.
Welcome to Frontline Facts with Luisa Deason, where we correct the rhetoric on immigration issues and public policy. Today, we have a special guest, Arturo Fontes. He is a former FBI agent who's going to give us the latest and greatest about how cartel activity affects both the economy in the U.S. and the economy in Mexico. Art, we want to welcome you back to the show. You've been a great provider of very key information, so welcome back.
Oh, it's great to hear from you, Luisa. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's dive right into some of the questions that I have. You know, I hear stories about the biggest trade that Mexico has is the state of Texas, beyond the United States. But let's kind of dive into and elaborate how much trade actually happens between both countries. And when we're talking about cartels, how much of that do they control?
Great. That's a good question. I wanted to give people some stats. Some people are aware of it. But what's at stake here, and why is Mexico so important now? Put things in context. We have our first Secretary of State that is Latino, Marco Rubio. He's brought this Monroe Doctrine back in, where we saw that China, Russia, and these countries that are against us have had a lot of influence in Latin America, and Donald Trump our president, wanted to bring back, to enforce, the Monroe Doctrine, where you have these countries that are unfavorable to us having so much, influence, getting into, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, and all these countries. And so now that's why you see us, getting Venezuela back, our influence, where we're even talking about taking Cuba back, and even Nicaragua is also mentioned in the picture. These are things where if Latin America, the Western Hemisphere, we could actually stand by ourselves. We have our mining, we have, the weather, climate, and tourism, precious metals, to stand on our own. We have our own petroleum if we all work together. But now you have, China's influence in all these countries. So that's a big, big threat. And just put things in perspective, we talk about the economy and give people a perspective. Mexico's population is about 134 million compared to 349 million in the United States. Mexico's GNP, gross domestic product, is 2.2 trillion. Ours is 32 trillion. Mexico right now is at a deficit of 4.5%. In other words, they're having to pay 4.5% more each month, where they don't have enough monies. They have Tren de Maya, the airport, the Mexico City airport, and also some of the gas pipelines. They're in ruin. They're having to pay a lot of money. They're negative. 72% of the natural gas and gasoline is imported from the U.S.
And I want to share this with you, Art. I did somewhat of a search. And of course, let me just read you this. Many economists estimate that the border cost of organized crime, drug trafficking, addiction, violence, healthcare, lost productivity, and law enforcement amount to hundreds of billions of dollars annually across North America. Impact is tremendous. And at the same time, cartels are estimated to generate tens of billions of dollars into the annual revenue for drug trafficking, the smuggling, et cetera, et cetera. It is a huge impact. And how do we see Mexico moving forward? And what does the United States need from Mexico? I mean, they are, after all, a neighboring country. How important is that maintained relationship?
If I'm talking to, our government, we're totally aware of that. And our country is putting so much resources trying to correct the situation. And what have we done? We look at this as as high stakes. There's three things that are going on right now. One of them, our midterm elections, FIFA, the trade agreement. Our trade agreement right now, we have so much leverage with Mexico. We want Mexico to go after these corrupt politicians that are poisoning and facilitating, enabling these cartels to operate with impunity where the drugs are coming across. That's a big threat. What's at stake? Well, you have our country that depends a lot right now because 80% of Mexico's exports is to the U.S. It's our number one trading partner. You
Mm.
know,
Through
when
many of it through Texas.
Yes, that's correct. And 10%, where there's so much at stake right now, and mostly it's economic, and it's also because our country has, what is it, 10% Mexican, Hispanic that live here. They're also big, producers. So there's so much at stake between Mexico and the U.S.
Now, let me ask you this because this question comes up all the time. You hear the Mexican president talk about how a good 40% of Mexican Americans that live here came into this country and generate a lot of money that they send back. But how much of that money is still, if they got here illegally, being funneled back to pay the cartels even decades after they've received money here and have been here for a good time?
Yes, because I know that there's a lot of this money. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but many of this money, because if you look at the states like Sinaloa, Michoacan, and these other areas, the cartels, the best way to get their money back is through remittances. And we've put Trump is also looking at that gap because now he's requiring, more know your customer, and where these people have to provide some more identification to do that. So I think our government is doing everything. I don't know any other president other than Ronald Reagan that has done more to fight the cartels than Ronald Reagan. It's his policies. It's not just our agents that are working there. It's his policies that have made a difference, labeling these cartels as terrorists.
Well, and I think that, a lot of people will say, well, that was a big mistake. And I think I applaud it. It's about time. They're just the level of violence that they participate in and what they've done, and just beheadings. And you mentioned it earlier. We have a lot of we're starting to see more organ harvesting and just a lot of unresolved crime in Mexico, and people that have disappeared and nobody knows where they are. And my heart breaks for some of those families that probably will never find their loved ones again. But the cartels are in control of everything. I hear stories about people that own Mexican businesses that are having visits from the cartel members, and they have to pay them a fee, whether it's weekly or monthly. How could you sustain your business that way?
No, many of these businesses rather just close up and just move on. You just said something about the cartels, labeling them as terrorists. And I remember when I was working in Laredo, of course I was in San Diego working the cartels, but when I got to Laredo, we wanted to label them as terrorists, but our government frowned upon it. They didn't want to see it because how would it be if we labeled them as terrorists? How our neighboring country, our number one trading partner, is harboring terrorists? How would that affect interstate commerce? How difficult would it be, to scrutinize more of the cargoes that comes into the U.S., and it would disrupt our economy, and people didn't want to see that. But I just how you asked me earlier is that how can these people not be labeled as terrorists? I've seen it and lived it, just living in Laredo, Texas, where you would find grenades inside vehicles. We had a grenade launched at a corner house in Laredo, Texas. We had kidnappings where the cartels would cross the border and take people into Mexico forcibly. And
And the
So,
level of violence, Art, I mean, people aren't just being killed, they're being dismembered. I remember seeing images of two different vans at the border way back when I worked for the Immigration Service. And one van was filled with heads and torsos, and the other one was filled with arms and legs. These are violent, violent criminals. They are not your typical, let me go in and rob you at gunpoint. These are violent entities.
yeah, so I've never seen it before. I thought when I was living in, living and working in Tijuana and Baja, I thought that was the worst. But seeing in Tamaulipas and then it carried over to, throughout Mexico, from Michoacan, to Jalisco, to Chiapas, to Tabasco. I've never seen the inhumane. It was just brutal, extremely brutal. People being skinned alive, families being, wiped out, including the dog. It was just horrible.
Unbelievable. Now, the United States bears enormous healthcare, law enforcement, and productivity costs, but cartels profit from what? They're damaging the Mexican economy. And so, what happens moving forward when you're thinking, okay, I open up a business? I know a lot of businesses are moving to the United States, but what we want to make sure is on this side, the scrutiny about what business is coming in and making sure that that business isn't used for laundering money. What can you tell me about that?
As you can see, you're starting to see U.S. businesses that have done business with Pemex are now being scrutinized because of the money laundering. And now many Mexican businessmen that are not coming into the U.S. just because they may have lived in Sinaloa or these different states. Now every state now is being scrutinized, and they're looking. And our government is now looking at the finances. Where if you've done some shady business with someone that has links to terrorism, they're starting to cancel visas. Many of these businessmen living in Texas, they're being looked at. As a matter of fact, there was just a case in um, of a Mexican businessman, living here in the U.S. and he became naturalized just recently. A case was taken to court on a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which means that this person paid monies and bribed people in Mexico, and he was they looked at him for under violation of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The case went to trial, and the U.S. government lost the trial. But what I'm getting at is that there's cases now, not just because of Pemex, but other means where they use our banking industry, where they, let's say, receive illegal monies and now they're investigating our banks to purchase houses. It's tainted. So they're being scrutinized a lot more. And some of these people could be innocent, just because there was an association, with monies that was tainted, it's being looked at. And it is affecting our economy 100%.
Well, and a lot of times, what we see here is you can't just have a bunch of people that don't have the correct paperwork or documentation to come in. And we know that a lot of people buy homes here. But the bigger threat is you can't sustain it if you're here undocumented and you purchase a home and they say, for example, I've seen this and I've heard this in Texas. There's a lot of companies out there that do no doc loans. Those are high risk loans. You get deported, you won't be able to pay those loans off. So it's an impact to the Texas or to the US economy as well. But what do you think needs to happen between the US and Mexico to improve trade agreements, to improve economies on both sides? How important is Mexico to us and vice versa?
Wow. I would say that Mexico, even though it's, their economy is only 2.2 trillion compared to our 32 trillion, it has so much influence because of our close proximity. And not just because of the economy, but many countries like Russia, China, um, Cuba have so much influence there. They've always used that as a base to spy on us. And so you're saying Mexico, if Mexico fails, you would have a humanitarian crisis. It would also affect our economy, and you would affect, if you think that the cartels are not doing enough, they would also start using, they're already in this country already. We labeled them as terrorists, there will have more drugs coming into the U.S. even if we seal the border. There's not this, as long as we have our demand that the drugs are still going to be coming in, and as long as there's a humanitarian crisis, they're going to find a way to get in to this country, and other countries are going to take advantage of that. People that are not, favorable to us, and I understand why Trump wanted to seal the border because he was probably anticipating that this could happen, the worst case scenario, where you could see a humanitarian crisis and the spillover of violence that could come across.
Well, and the last thing we need is, we have to make sure that we maintain our national security. What we saw under the Biden administration was just absolute chaos and insanity. I know the asylum laws really, really well, and I can tell you, seeking asylum underneath the bridge in Del Rio is not how you do it. You have to come into an open port of entry, present yourself, but you also can't transit to 4 or 5 different states and live in several of those, including if you came in from maybe South America, living in several countries in Central and, South and Central America before you decide you make your pillage into the United States and then you're dropping your documents at the border. That doesn't work either. Listen, we're going to have to cut over to a commercial break real quick because we do have sponsors we want to highlight. Thank you for waiting.
Houston, we have a problem. We live in a time when headlines move faster than facts, when stories are shared around the world in seconds, and when truth often becomes lost in the noise. But what if you could step behind the curtain and see how the news is really made? In a reporter's journey inside media, DHS and ICE, veteran journalist and former DHS and ICE spokesperson Luisa Deason, takes readers on a remarkable journey from the newsroom to the front lines of government communication. For decades, she witnessed how stories were gathered, shaped, framed, and delivered to the public. She saw the pressure of deadlines, the competition for ratings, the rise of 24-hour news cycles, and the growing influence of narratives over facts. This is not a political book. It is a book about understanding how information reaches us, how public opinion is formed, and why critical thinking has never been more important. If you've ever questioned the headlines, wondered what's missing from the story, or searched for the truth beneath the surface, this book is for you. A reporter's journey inside media, DHS and ICE, from the newsroom to DHS and ICE. I saw the truth before it was changed. Coming soon to Amazon.
Well, we are back. I am Luisa Deason. I am your host for Frontline Facts. We are correcting the rhetoric, and we're coming back to our guest today. Let's go into and make a little bit of a pivot. You mentioned earlier that we have several terrorist cells in the United States here already. What is the biggest threat we face? I mean, obviously, we're not seeing car bombs in the middle of the afternoon, but there is a potential for that. Let's talk a little bit about what the bigger threat is to us.
I had the privilege to work, terrorism, but when I say real terrorism, I mean the Middle Eastern groups that are already operating. And I remember in 9/11, living in San Diego, Charles Butler, one of the agents that was there, he was the handling agent of one of the houses where 2 of the hijackers lived in a house, and where our government, the CIA was not sharing information, and they lived in the San Diego and other parts of the U.S., and they committed this heinous act, of the Twin Towers in New York. I was expecting that when this thing happened, and I believe it's still plausible where you could see, terrorist cells, because when I was working 9/11, after 9/11, we saw these Afghanistan, where they had the training areas, and people training how to go in, to let's say a mall, or going into an establishment and shooting people up, or having grenades. And we believe that some of these cells were already in the U.S. I was surprised to see that there has been no incidents like this, something equivalent to what happened in India. there's still, what we call sleeper cells in the U.S. And if they're there, I'm not sure why they haven't reacted. So that's also a potential threat, or these lone wolves that could happen, because it's not just these cells are waiting for something to happen. There's propaganda that's out there in the dark web where people are looking at this, and it's just a reason it could be a lone wolf. And not only that, you could also see the other side, extreme ultra-right groups that could, when they hit the mosque in San Diego, that could happen, or McVeigh, Timothy
Yeah.
McVeigh, Oklahoma. So there could be either one or the other because of the hates, on both sides. So I'm just saying is that yes, the threat is real. We cannot let our guard down. I think our government right now is aware of it, and we all worried. I believe that the cartels, if their back is against the wall, and we always call it patadas de ahogado, almost like if somebody's drowning in the pool and they're flopping, and they see that there's no way out. If they know already that they're going to get killed, or they're going to be cornered, what do they have to lose?
Yeah.
And they're here in the U.S. There's, they have groups in every single city in the U.S. and they're still sending the drugs and everything into the U.S.
Well, and I heard a scary statistic. I read about it too. I mean, I traveled to the summit with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and one of the things that they spoke about is what's happened in London over the past, say, 10 years. And if we don't wake up, the same's going to happen here. You look at Mondami in New York and you think, how on earth does a person like that get elected? And it's propaganda. It's the kind of rhetoric that, creates the division within the country. Maybe you can share some insight on that.
Well, just like what's happening in Europe, we're not too far. Dallas is having a community now where they potentially could have Sharia law, and the influence of Muslim leaders now in the community, making choices. You have, some congressmen that are, and I'm nothing against the Muslims, but when you have Muslim people that are extreme,
Yeah, we don't need the radical mentality here that
that's
wants to
exactly what I'm
chant
looking
down
at.
to America.
And that's exactly what I'm looking at. I just saw the news, where a referee from Somalia was not permitted to come into the U.S. because he had terrorist ties. So
Well, and there were a couple of felonies. I think I read that as well. It's just we do need to protect our nation and make sure we're not inviting terrorists. But the bigger threat is people don't. I have conversations about this every day, and people are just still almost like, wake up, wake up. This is in your backyard. You need to be aware of your surroundings. You can't take a Bible into a school, but you can certainly carry in a brochure that talks about Sharia law. And I know that there are good Muslims, and I know that there's the threat of the Islamic movement. But what we don't want to see is them praying in the streets like they're having a huge problem in McKinney. There's about 500 mosques, is my understanding, just in the state of Texas alone.
yes, and I see that not just in the U.S. but also Mexico. And when you work terrorism, you learn that the objective is long term, where they want to convert as many Muslims as possible. And if you're not Muslim, you're an infidel, and that you can see that happening in some parts of Europe now, where people are even afraid. And I'm not being hyperbole, but it is true. I remember going to places with my daughter in Paris, getting off at the wrong stop and just feeling in fear, for my life, or for, where you see the looks where they look at you
And coming from you, I think that would be pretty scary.
yeah,
I usually look at my husband, and if I see a reaction out of him, then it's time where I worry. But I'm kind of, I wasn't an agent, but I've worked with agents most of my life. And so I know, what are some of the signs when they show fear in their eyes. It's like, okay, my awareness is up.
Well, what I was looking at is you get off at the wrong stop, let's say in Paris, at some exit, and then you let your wife and your daughter, you go into this area, and you're totally surrounded mostly by males, young, and they look at you because maybe your daughter or your wife is not wearing the scarf around her hair.
Right.
They're looking at her, and they're not looking at her in a favorable way. and you're surrounded by these people, and you even see some videos sometimes where they look at you as, in not in a good way, and we had to return back to the to the subway and take, get onto a different exit. So you just feel that when something bad could happen, you just got to move.
Yeah, you're exactly correct. I do a lot of work at night with candidates, and I'm, in different areas of town. And of course, I'm always, I tell my kids, and I use this myself, as my head on a swivel everywhere I go.
That's correct.
Check in, and I tell my kids, don't check in because I'm hounding you. Check in because I have to have a point of reference if something happens to you. Where do I start looking?
That's
And
correct.
with all the trafficking that goes on, not only this country and everywhere else, you just need to make sure. And people go, well, they're boys. Boys and girls are being trafficked. It's there's not a difference here. They're both being trafficked. Any lasting thoughts or you want to add anything that people need to be aware of as we move forward? What should be some of the signs or things that they need to be looking for or reporting? I tell people, if it looks out of place, report it.
Well, I'll give you an example. I just mentioned that earlier today, and I said that I knew that I was going in with a delegation of Americans, and the people that are with, the president, Reggie Gray, my friend, my other brother from a different mother, blonde hair, and then you have other people that are, they look Anglo, and the bad guys know that we're tourists and they don't want to mess with us. But then they went to bed early, and we stuck around. And when you went into that iconic bar, you look around, and normally what I do is I look around the bar, and I even sometimes take a video of the bar of everybody that's there. That's just me, and in case something does happen, I already know who's there. And and so then when I look around a bar, you look at 180, you look left, right, and you look at it, your back's against the wall. And normally, if I see a face of someone looking at me, and then I turn around, for a couple of minutes, and I look back, and I see that same person looking at me again, and we catch eye to eye, and then I look at his profile, and if he's an old person, if it's somebody that doesn't look like a threat, no big deal. But if it's someone like I saw later that day, these people sat next to me, and I did the same damn thing, and there was that many people at the bar, and they look at me 2 times, 3 times, and then I said, "Man, this just doesn't seem right."
And
And
your gut's never wrong.
no, and so instead of moving from one place to the other, I knew that if I walked 1 block, they would follow me, or they would tell the police to stop me. So I knew that they were just halcones looking at us, but these were different halcones, because the halcones that really, these guys were well dressed, meaning they had nice tennis shoes, they had jeans, and they had a nice shirt and a jacket on, but they were dressed nice, and they had a military haircut, sort of. And so I knew that these guys were cartel guys. And instead of, let's say I knew what they wanted. They wanted to see if we were there spying on them, or we are going to do some harm to them. And so I approached them directly, and I was, "Hey, how's it going? My name's Art. Well, we're here from Houston," because I know those are the questions they're asking.
Yes.
We just had an event here, and we're just here having a nice drink. Could I buy you a drink? Because I wanted to approach them. And once they realized that we were not threats to them, they went back and reported to the police that we were not spies or from another cartel. But I don't think anybody would be in that position to do that, because they don't know how to talk to them. They probably would have been scared and got to another place. But the point I'm getting at is that you normally feel when something is not right.
Your
Uh,
gut is never wrong.
Yes, and then definitely when you're there, just be aware of your surroundings. I mean, how many people are sitting there with someone, and they're looking at their damn phone, and they're not, like you said, eyes, your head's like a swivel looking around. You don't want to be so damn obvious looking around like. But I'm just saying, it's just normal. Just look around, and you could tell them when somebody's looking at you, kind of the wrong way. You know that something's wrong, and you could tell sometimes how they're dressed. Well, and the people that may do harm is it could be a woman, that's talking to a male, and not only that though, is you hear, like, I had 2 or 3 cases just recently. A family's calling me and says, "Art, I have a family member that's missing in Colombia, in Medellin," and then you start interviewing them, and it has to do, I had that person from Texas that went to Medellin. He was a stewardess, and he he died because someone put some dopamine with some drug in his drink, and it was too much, and he died. And that happens not just in Mexico or in Colombia.
That happens here.
It even happens here. And so, but in these cases, when you ask me what should they do, well, if you're out there looking for drugs, don't do it. If you're out there, if you're looking at prostitutes, well, there's a potential that could happen. And number three is if you're in a bar, late hours, and you get in a fight with someone that could be a cartel member, don't do that. And if someone's
Yeah, there's certain things you can avoid doing.
yeah, those are the obvious things. And the other things is, if you're a woman, wear tennis shoes or wear something that you could run with, and
Don't wear your damn Crocs.
and stay away from the ex if you feel something, and if you have a backpack, carry it in the front, carry your purse in your front. I don't carry any wallet in the back of my in my pocket. Your credit card, if they're charging, make sure they do it there at your table, and don't be gullible to everything you see.
Yeah.
One big thing is sometimes you're driving in a taxi or somebody wants to offer you, let's say, a lollipop. Don't buy it. Don't even get it. Instead, just put them on pesos if you want to, but don't even buy it there because
Well, and those are all things that we obviously growing up in a foreign country and that we've traveled know. But I mean, a lot of people, it's hard to tell my children, you've got to keep your head on a swivel. They are so trusting of everyone. And it's like, you just can't do that.
yes.
And we don't want a vigilant child where they're always afraid and they're afraid to speak up and they're always in a panic. But I just tell them, if it looks out of place, most likely it's out of place and you need to act accordingly. Don't panic. But if you need to leave the area, just know what direction you're going in.
Yes, my wife saw someone wearing a hood, and this was in what was it? It was here in Texas. We were in Texas, and this guy was wearing a hood in a very it was warm, like 90 degrees. I said,
What? Like a black
Oh,
trench coat.
yeah. So my thing is, those are things that just don't look right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we were on a bus in Cancun years ago, and I was buying some jewelry. And my husband we hopped on the city transportation, which was probably not the best idea. But anyway, we did it. I'm speaking Spanish. And this guy I think he was crazy. He just might have had a mental illness. And he gets on and he starts kind of like ranting and raving and yelling on the bus. And I panicked. And my husband grabbed me and said, "Sit down." And I thought, okay, we're going to listen and heed the warnings, right? Don't get into a public bus and go down to the jewelry store because you'll be followed back. We all live it. But I just like to tell people, you just have to be aware of your surroundings when you travel.
That's correct.
Well, Art, it always is a pleasure to interview you. I know that we're going to have you back on a couple of other times as things progress and we see more activity with cartels and what's happening with Mexico and trade, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to thank you for being on. I want to thank all of our audience for listening to us and keeping up with the latest trends and what's happening around us. And again, I want to thank everyone. I am your host, Luisa Deason, and we've come to the end of this particular episode of Frontline Facts. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one, Lisa.